So it is time. After a miserable week last week where we went 7-7 in the money line and 1 for 5 in best bets, we are looking to bounce back today as it is my week 6 money line picks and best bets for 2024 NFL season. We got a lot of interesting games this week. Drake May, obviously, in his rookie start. We got Joe Burrow and the Bengals 1-4 on Sunday Night Football this week. We got an interesting clash in the NFC West on Thursday Night Football. We got another London game where the Jags could be fighting to save their season. All that and more. Let's start off with Thursday night because the Niners coming out that bad loss to Arizona, Seattle coming out that bad loss to the Giants. Now they meet here on a short week. San Francisco, I have not heard the status on Jake Moody, their kicker. I'm sure if he cannot go, they're going to have another kicker. You just can't go into a game without a kicker. It cost the Niners the game last week. As I mentioned, these are two angry teams. And San Francisco is 0-2 in the division. Seattle has not played in the division yet. That is a real factor. San Francisco cannot drop to 0-3 in the division. They've owned Seattle during the past couple of years. Now, Mike McDonald is the former defensive coordinator, we know. Obviously, the Baltimore Ravens, who had massive success against Brock Purdy and this Niners team on Christmas Day a year ago. San Francisco does not look the same without Christian McCaffrey in the backfield for whatever reason. Seattle, though, they do struggle to stop the run. I think this could be a big George Mason game here for the Niners. And on a short week, clever Kyle Shanahan, going to be very physical. I think they just wear down Seattle. They run the football. Now, again, is this a situation where Seattle, who's played bad the last 2 weeks, they lose that heartbreaker to Detroit on Monday night? They come back, they play like crap against the Giants. Do they bounce back here, give San Francisco everything they handle, potentially win or at least cover the 3.5? Yes, it's possible. But again, the Niners, they cannot drop to 2-4. If Seattle's 4-2, San Francisco is 2-4. Minnesota's already 5-0. That would put them 4 games back in the loss column of Minnesota for the 1 seed. And with a Seattle win, plus their 0-3 in the division, they're essentially 3 games back at that point in the division. So this game matters a lot more to San Francisco than it does to Seattle, which is why I'll take the Niners. Next game, we're going across the pond. Jaguars, who have historically played well in London. We know they always seemingly do. They'll pull off an upset or two in London that we don't suspect. They're taking on Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears, who have only gotten better offensively every single week. Now, I do expect Matt Eberflus's defense to show up. Eberflus was in Indianapolis for Trevor Lawrence's rookie year, so he's seen him a little bit. Obviously, Doug Peterson was not in Jacksonville by the time Matt Eberflus got to Chicago, so they haven't seen each other a ton. But again, Trevor Lawrence, Jacksonville, they always play well. Tank Bigsby replacing Travis Etienne in the run game. Last week at a productive day, Brian Thomas, the receiver they drafted, has been absolutely incredible so far to help with the passing game. Gabe Davis has been a nice addition from Buffalo. Where Jacksonville struggles on defense, though, they're actually pretty good against the run. I think they're middle or even above the pack this year against the run. They struggle in pass protection. They're 31st in the league in pass yards per game. Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Doomsday, load them up. I think this has the potential to, even though most London games don't have shootouts, we could very well have a shootout here. I think both teams go up and down the field. Again, Trevor Lawrence has looked well the last couple of weeks in Jacksonville. He looks like he's getting back to the Trevor Lawrence of old. They put up 37 points last week against the Colts. We know Doug Peterson coaching for his job at 1-4. Very desperate for both sides. This would be a bad loss for Chicago as they are trying to get to 4-2, chasing Minnesota, chasing Detroit in that division. I got the Bears winning. Spread is 1.5. Not gonna bet London games, just like I wore my Watson last week. Even though I like San Francisco in this spot, I didn't mention it. But not gonna bet Thursday night games here for a while unless I get a really good feel for the game, like Vikings at Rams, Week 8 already. I think I have a really good feel. I'll talk about that when I get to the Detroit game here against Dallas. Um, but I don't know. London games are weird. Don't love the bet because Jacksonville historically does great in London, though I like the Bears in this spot. Okay. I've been on multiple shows this week. My old partner, Believe One Media, and I went on the Land Sports Show with James Ellifrance on Tuesday. Not only did I break down Guardians Tigers, not only did I talk cash preseason, I talked Browns Eagles. My partner, Championship Rings, Josh Unger, he does the Sports Room Talk Show where he does video collaborations with other YouTubers of other fan bases. We know he's a massive Cleveland Browns fan. With him, I discussed this entire matchup in depth between the Browns and the Eagles. Obviously, Eagles are my favorite team. I talked about this growing up, seeing Donovan McNabb on my television, Brian Dawkins, Brian Westbrook got me to be an Eagles fan. Born and raised in the Cleveland area, which is why I am a Browns observer. Philadelphia is favored by 8.5. Boy, I don't know. The Browns look like the worst team in football, right? Deshaun Watson's got open guys he's missing. The offensive line has been a turnstile at times. They can't run the football without Nick Chubb. The tackling has been egregious from a Jim Schwartz defense that is usually very good at tackling. Jalen Carter could dominate the interior of that Browns offensive line. Philadelphia, though, has not blown out anybody since early last season. A lot of pressure on Nick Sirianni here because if he loses to Cleveland, he could be out of a job. You have A.J. Brown coming back. You have Devontae Smith coming back. Should help the offense coming out of a bye. Not only that, but Wayne Johnson, the all-pro right tackle, is back. The numbers with Philadelphia, I talked about this with Sean, yesterday. Sean Fitzgerald, my buddy with Voltage Live, that the numbers the Eagles have with Wayne Johnson versus without Wayne Johnson is extraordinary. I like Philadelphia here in this spot. I think the spread just a little bit too much for my beak. Next game, Commanders at Ravens. Now, originally, I would have loved the Commanders plus 6.5. However, Lamar Jackson has only lost one game to the NFC in his whole career. Yes, it's to Daniel Jones, but it was in 2020 in MetLife Stadium when there was no fans. And when you don't see Lamar Jackson very often, it's very hard to defend him. And that's why, to me, he's had so much success against the NFC. Jaden Daniels is trying to emulate him a little bit. Obviously, a down the road rivalry here with DC against Baltimore, but I just think the Commanders' pass defense is bad. The Browns are the only team that couldn't take advantage of it. Washington, to me, is not going to be able to stop this Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson freight train. I think Zach Orr has done a great job filling in for Mike McDonald, better than I thought he would originally. For the Ravens at DC, they give up a lot of points to Cincinnati last week. Yes, this could be very similar to the Commanders Bengals game on Monday night, where both teams just go up and down the field. Whoever gets the ball last is going to win the game. But I think Derrick Henry and the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson offense, the ball control from Baltimore could be what keeps this a little bit more or less scoring. I think the Ravens just roll here against NFC teams. So I sort of like the Commanders plus 6.5. I could see it being close. I could also see Baltimore bringing the beat down to Washington because Washington just cannot stop Lamar. For those reasons, I'm not betting the game. I like the Ravens again at home. Houston taking on Drake May in his first start. New England at home. They're 7.5 point dogs to Houston. Sounds like again, Joe Mixon could be back this week for the Texans, which will help their run game, which will help CJ Stroud, who has struggled ever since Mixon went down at the end of that week 2 game against Chicago, and he's officially missed the last 3 ball games. They did not put him on IR, which means they expected him to be back for this game. A tricky situation, right? Because usually rookie quarterback, his first start, he's going to get killed. But there is no tape on Drake May. He's at home. New England's offense has been pedestrian this year with Jacoby Brissett. He does not even have 175 yards passing in any game this season. Does New England play inspired? Ramondre Stevenson, who was benched this past week for fumbling, had a nice touchdown run against Miami. Do they run the football a little bit better? Just, Jacoby Brissett has gotten killed this year by a bad New England offensive line. Does Drake May under center? Do they move the pocket a little bit more? Maybe a couple of zone reads. Does that help the offensive line more? So there's a scenario where New England plays well, they cover. There's a scenario where they get killed. I think there's better bets on the board. I like Houston to win, but I'm going to stay away from the bet. That leads me to my first game. I know Tennessee's coming off a bye. They're one of the out-point dogs, which basically means unless obviously Indy only wins by a point, which is very unlikely the way scoring works in the NFL. Obviously, safety 2, field goal 3, touchdown 6 with the extra point makes it 7. The only 4 ways to score points in the National Football League. I guess there is, the 2-point conversion, the pick 2, etc. But it earns up points. It's 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7. So Tennessee, dogged by 1.5. I don't even care if it's Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco under center. I think Indianapolis, bad loss last week to Jacksonville where they came back and won. Flacco had a crazy game. They just could not get Jacksonville off the field. I think Gus Bradley and crew, you're not facing Trevor Lawrence. You're facing Will Levis. Will Levis wound up making a mistake. The Colts wound up winning and covering. Okay, next game. I've done this a few times this year where I've taken one team in the money line, but I've taken the other team to cover. It's worked out. I'm doing it twice this week. The first one, Arizona. I take them to cover, but I like Green Bay to win the game. This is Arizona at Green Bay. Green Bay is favored by 5.5. So again, I have Arizona losing by 5 or less. What scares me about this game is Arizona had a big emotional win last week against San Francisco, which they should have not had if it wasn't for Jake Moody, obviously, being out for San Francisco. Is there an emotional letdown for Arizona or for Green Bay? They got their first win, with Jordan Love on the season against the Rams. Close, tight game, but they dominated for most of it. Does their momentum carry? Sure, there is that possibility. But, Green Bay, outside of Tennessee, who's not very good, they don't blow people out. And they struggle with mobile quarterbacks. And I think, again, Kyler Murray is at a very good year. Marvin Harrison Jr., who was quiet last week, even though he will go up against Jair Alexander and that Green Bay secondary, I think he looks to have a bounce back game. Listen, we saw Arizona play well on the East Coast against Buffalo in week 1. I know this is West to East Coast. I don't think that's an issue here for this particular team. And Jonathan Gannon, obviously last week, they played that Kyle Shanahan style, the zone read, outside zone run, bootleg, under center, 12 personnel offense. Matt LaFleur runs the same offense. So I think it's an advantage for Arizona. They see the same type of offense 2 weeks in a row. I like them to cover. I do think Green Bay bounces back, though. They get the hard fought win. Now, this next game is an interesting game because at the time of this recording on Wednesday, I don't know the status of Derek Carr. Right now, Tampa Bay is favored by 3.5. I'll get to this when we talk about the Atlanta game next. But I don't care if you play 5 snaps or if you play 30 snaps. When teams go to overtime, they struggle the next week. And historically, in the Tom Brady era, which team gave Brady the most problem? New Orleans. Now, last year, Tampa Bay shocked them. They went down to New Orleans. They dominated. I think the Saints are looking at their wounds a little bit. Their offensive line is beat up. They got a couple pieces missing there. Could Villa have a huge game for them? Absolutely, you bet he could. I think Baker Mayfield and Tampa, they know that they want that game against Atlanta get away from them. They got to bounce back here. I think, again, New Orleans is getting exposed, the team we thought they were before the season, which is pretty bad. They had a nice win at Dallas week 2. I think people are starting to figure out that Gary Kubiak offense. And so by that respect, I have Tampa here winning the game, though I'm not gonna bet them. Next game that I am gonna bet. I like Carolina to cover the 6.5 here against Atlanta. Again, I talked about it historically. When you go to overtime the next week, you struggle. Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards. And yes, the Panthers are a bad football team. I understand it. They got their doors blown off last week by the Chicago Bears. But Atlanta, they've not run the football great this year, even with Bijan Robinson. It's been a throwing offense with McLeod and Mooney and Drake London and even Kyle Pitts started to get involved. So I think this is a combination of Atlanta playing extra time. Now, it wasn't a short week, they have a couple more days to prepare, but you're playing on an overtime game. You played extra snaps last week. Carolina got embarrassed in Chicago. I think they just give a better effort. And so maybe I'm crazy. I like Carolina here. I think they can keep this game close. It's a divisional game. I think they bounce back a little bit. I'll take Atlanta to win, but I'm going to take the points. Now, this next game, Steelers lost in embarrassing fashion. Now, we don't know. By the time this podcast is recorded again on a Wednesday morning, by the time this episode airs on Thursday, Russell Wilson could be the Pittsburgh Steelers starter. But they go to Vegas, take on a Raiders team who was embarrassed last week by the Denver Broncos. And again, they got embarrassed. They're going to play well. But Gardner Minshew was benched again last week by the Raiders. After that first drive, he was terrible, including the 100-yard pick six to Patrick Surtain. I'm wondering if Vegas goes to Aiden O'Connell this week. We saw them win a game last year against Kansas City. He didn't have a completion at the end of the first quarter. They just played super defense out there. I think this is Max Crosby versus TJ Watt. Whoever gets the most pressure is going to be just like the Steelers Denver game in week 2. Low scoring, play defense, run the football, don't turn the football over. I think Pittsburgh does that better than Vegas. They play again here, big rivalry. We know the Steelers and Raiders. Steelers beat down the Raiders last year in week 3. Don't know if that's the case here, but I like the matchup for Pittsburgh to win. Chargers at Denver. Very tricky game here, divisional game. Bo Nix is playing well, but he is facing Jim Harbaugh. And Vance Joseph and that Denver defense is going to have to play spectacular. Justin Herbert should be a little more healthy. We'll see if they get Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater back on that offensive line to help Herbert, who they held Kansas City down to 17 points. They just couldn't score. I don't think Denver's defense is good as Kansas City. Denver obviously had a big win last week against the Raiders. They've had a big win against Tampa a couple weeks ago as well. I think there's a little bit of a letdown spot here. Jim Harbaugh off a bye with 2 weeks to prepare. I think the Chargers are just more physical. Again, divisional game could be close. That 3-point spread feels about right. Not going to bet the game, but I like the Chargers to win. Okay, I am betting the Lions. I've taken them at this number multiple times this year. It's worked out. -3 on the road in Dallas. I don't care that the Cowboys stole a victory last week in Pittsburgh against the Steelers. They're still not a very good team. They still can't stop the run against a team that loves to run the football. Without DeMarcus Lawrence, without Micah Parsons, with that Detroit Lions physical offensive line, I think this is a David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs type game. I think the Lions just pound Dallas. And I think this could be like the Baltimore game where Dallas comes back in the second half and makes it a game. But early here, I think the Lions jump on Dallas. Jared Goff, we know, is very good in the dome. And again, ever since week 2, that lost to Tampa, where he threw over 50 times, Jared Goff, the last time we saw him, was perfect in a football game. And I know Dan Campbell was watching that game Sunday night against Pittsburgh. I know he's got the Lions prepared. They're going to come out well rested. Ben Johnson's going to have some tricks up his sleeve off a bye. I think Detroit comes in there and could hammer Dallas physically. Now, I wanted to talk about this aspect as I talked about a little bit on Tuesday, but if you didn't hear the show on Tuesday, I'll break it down for you now. Teams that play the Lions this year, what did they do the game after? Rams week 1 played the Lions, and week 2 they got killed by Arizona. Week 2, Tampa played the Lions. Week 3, they got killed by Denver. Week 3, Arizona played the Lions. In week 4, Arizona got routed by Washington. Week 4, Seattle played the Lions. Week 5, they got beat by the Giants. Obviously, the Lions are coming off a bye. The thing for Dallas here is in week 7, they have a bye, but they also go to San Francisco. So that's a very interesting game for Dallas, playing two physical teams back to back. We're playing Atlanta in week 9. Minnesota plays the Lions in week 7. So, like I said, on a short week, look out for the Rams in week 8 after Minnesota plays Detroit in week 7, which will be a huge game in the NFC North. Now, Cincinnati's burned me this year. I'm going back to the well. I just think they can cover the 3.5 against the Giants, who, again, I'm sorry, they're still not a very good football team. This could be a showcase between Jamar Chase and Malik Neighbors for which wide receiver has a bigger outing. Both of these secondaries are trash. I just think you're giving me Joe Burrow versus Daniel Jones. And I know this year it's been about defense and cover two shell and whoever has the better coach. And I like Brian Dable. I think he's smart. And the Bengals defense we know is torchable. But I just think the quarterback matchup here is too big on the scale. And I think Cincinnati, they don't want to get embarrassed in prime time again. We've seen Cincinnati a lot this year. We saw them against Kansas City. We saw them against Washington. They already lost to a bad team in New England. They're not going to make the same mistake here. They're not going to take it lightly. I think this could be an ugly game for New York Giants fans. So, MetLife Stadium, we're going to see in the span of 24 hours. We're going to see the Giants at home against Cincinnati, but then we're also going to see the Jets at home on a Monday night against Buffalo. We just talked about it in the last segment. Robert Saleh being fired, Jeff Ulbrich now the DC. Interim head coaches in their first week typically do very well. You're going to get the best out of the guys. They have they have an extra day, I should say, to prepare here against Buffalo. They did beat them last year in New York with Zach Wilson opening night. Buffalo and Josh Allen have struggled the last couple weeks. Josh Allen went 9 for 30 in that game against Houston. I think he will play very well. I think there's going to be some hard coaching there from Joe Brady, from Sean McDermott. Buffalo will definitely move the ball on this Jets defense, which, again, was not the issue for them last week in Minnesota. It was the offense. But I think Aaron Rodgers, for whatever reason, prime time Monday night, they got embarrassed against San Francisco in week 1. 5 weeks later, I think Aaron, with a new coach, is going to be on his game. It's a very interesting dynamic here. The Jets obviously cannot lose. Buffalo losing 2 in a row. Do they go from 3-0 to 3-3? The Jets are 2.5 point dogs. Vegas thinks Buffalo is better. I still don't know about that. I'm sticking with my guns. There's a reason why I picked the Jets this year to win the AFC East. I think the Jets win the game. So to recap, I got San Francisco over Seattle, Chicago over Jacksonville in London, Philly over Cleveland, Baltimore over Washington, Houston over New England, Indy over Tennessee, Green Bay over Arizona, Tampa over New Orleans, Atlanta over Carolina, Pittsburgh over Vegas, LA Chargers over Denver, Detroit over Dallas, Cincinnati over the New York Giants, and the Jets at home Monday night. They defeat the Buffalo Bills. My 5 best bets for week 6 of the 2024 NFL season are: I have Indianapolis on the road, covering the 1.5 against Tennessee. I don't love them to win, but I like the points. I think it's too many. Give me Arizona plus 5.5 against Green Bay. I know you might think I'm nuts, but again, teams in overtime the following week do struggle. I think Carolina, who was embarrassed last week by Chicago, they make it close. Give me the 6.5, just too many points against Atlanta at home. I like the Lions to cover the 3 against Dallas. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, I think they run all over that Cowboys defense. And finally, I know the Bengals defense is trash, but it's Joe Burrow against Daniel Jones. I like Cincinnati to cover 3.5 against the Giants. Like that clip from the Brandsworth podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brandsworth podcast right here on YouTube.